officially and welcome everyone to this big TA job search in-house recruitment webinar. My name is Natasha Pereira-Cannon. I'm the Managing Director for in-house recruitment. We're the largest and most inclusive community of in-house recruiters and TA professionals here in the UK. We're really running today's webinar, and if you haven't heard of us before, we run lots of different events, but the reason why we're running today's webinar is part of our ongoing mission to support all of our recruitment and TA friends who have been affected by redundancies and displacements over the last few months. And we know, and we can see from the chat function today, that it's still prevalent, but hopefully we're going to answer some of those challenges around finding new roles, how to stand out from the crowd, and other such details as well. We are running today's webinar in partnership with our partner, Carafi. They're good friends and the advisory arm of IHR, so please do feel free to reach out to them. They are TA advisory specialists in operational excellence, brand and experience, and tech and data. Just to give you a bit of background and a bit of context, and David is Carafi's representative here today, offering his insight as well. We are also joined by Phil Sterne and Trish Nichol, and they're really going to be diving into their experience, their knowledge, their expertise to hopefully provide some insight and some other information for everyone online today. The session is being recorded, so if you do get that phone call that you need to take and you can't miss, do feel free to jump off, and we'll be able to share the recording with you post-event, and feel free to share that with any colleagues or industry professionals that you think will also find it useful. We do also have a couple of polls throughout today's session. And as I did say at the beginning, we want to make this really interactive. And I can see my chat function trying to popping up here, there and everywhere, which is a little bit distracting for me, but I'll read them whilst the other guys are talking in a second. But that's exactly what we want. So please do feel free to connect with all of our panelists, but also those of you that are on today's session as well. Feel free to share your LinkedIn profiles with one another. So what I'm going to do is just to get a little bit of a consensus as to where everyone's at the moment. I just want to launch this very quick poll just to understand what your employment status currently is. And I think whilst people are completing that, I'm just going to ask our lovely panelists to introduce themselves for a bit of context and a little bit of background. And David, you're top left in my view, so I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay.
Yeah, okay. Good morning, everybody. Nice to see so many people show up. My name is David Brammer. I am typically a head of recruitment or TA director. I have been for a number of brands, including Ocado, Kingfisher Group. I've formerly worked a lot in retailing, TK Maxx and Boots and other companies. Right now, I'm on a contract with a company called Kantar Public, helping them with some work, which is great. I am here today because I have recently been through a very, very similar kind of set of events as many people have. I took redundancy from Ocado back at the start of April. Although I've been kind of doing work and stuff since, I can definitely empathize and share some insights from what I found really, really useful in the last kind of couple of months of going through that process. So it's nice to see everybody, and please do connect with me on LinkedIn. Excellent.
Thank you, David. And Phil, I'm going to come to you next.
Yeah, thanks. Morning. My name's Phil Sterne, and my background is in recruitment and TA, going back some 25 odd years. My career's been a bit kind of wiggly insofar as I started as a headhunter back in the late 90s, went into in-house roles, and then found myself at places like Alton Towers, leading their recruitment function there, supporting Merlin in their kind of world domination of visitor attractions, and took on a number of different contracts after that. Worked at Unipart Automotive, did a contract at London Stock Exchange. I did some work for Wolseley, Nichol, which became Kier, which is now WSP, sort of doing a range of different kind of change projects around TA from sort of implementing software and ATSs through to processes and outsourcing and whatnot. Found myself at Amazon for 3 years, helping them sort of build out their European operation. But then 3.5 years ago, had a complete change and decided I'd had enough of working for the big man and wanted to work for myself. So I set myself up as a career coach and CV writer, interview coach and whatnot. And, you know, that's where I am now. And that's kind of developed into more of a sort of executive coaching type role as well. So kind of two sides to what I do now.
Excellent, thank you, Phil. Well, I'm sure we're going to hear lots from you in a bit around how to shine. And Trish, yourself.
Yes, thank you, Natasha. Morning, everyone. Lovely to see you all. So my name is Trish Nichol. Like David and Phil, I have been in TA and recruitment for over 22 years. I started as an agency researcher, then headhunting for about 6-7 years. My career spans from retail to technical to solar energy. I worked as a consultant for a number of years. So I started with some of the bigger companies. So Nestle, from Nestle, I then moved to Sony, and all of my roles have been heading up recruitment, TA director roles, head of operations roles globally. And then I ended up working for Accenture for about 18 months, looking at their onboarding globally for them. So my background is varied. We all wear different hats for different things, but I'm really happy to talk to all of you today and help support our community.
Amazing, thank you. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to share the results of the poll. So 59% of everyone on online here is unemployed and actively looking for work. So another 19% are uncertain or concerned about the future, and another 23% are employed but keen to hear best practice as well. So hopefully that gives you a bit of insight as to who's on the call for our panelists, and good to see all of you here supporting each other, and lots of LinkedIn sharing going on as well. So we're going to get stuck into some of the questions, and we're going to try and split it out into sort of 3 key trends or 3 key areas. And I think the first thing that we want to cover is actually what the current state of the market is at the moment. So when you all registered for this webinar, we asked you what you wanted to see and what you wanted to get from this session, and Phil rightly said earlier on that actually people just want to understand what is happening. Are they alone? But David, perhaps I can come to you first and foremost. Just what is going on in the market at the moment, especially over the last 6 months, and where are you thinking that it's probably going to head in the next couple of months or so?
Yeah, so much like many people, and like I kind of previously mentioned, I left Ocado back in kind of April and had agreed to do so very confidently in maybe December, January time, at which point it felt like the market actually hadn't entirely retracted, and it felt quite buoyant still. I think comparatively from right now today, from kind of 12 months ago, you could say that the market has entirely flipped. And what was an entirely candidate-led market 12 months ago, where there just weren't enough heads of TA and good TA people out there, and demand definitely outweighed supply, I think it's fair to say that it's quite the opposite now. On the positive side, in the last month, certainly I've seen a hell of a lot more opportunity out there, a lot more people moving every morning. When you're on LinkedIn, you can kind of see new people saying, well, I'm starting this new role as this there, you know, and that's really positive signs. I think the couple of things that I would call out specifically is that while there is a market which is almost, I guess, client driven or company driven rather than candidate driven, is that it will drive some of the wrong behaviors just around businesses failing to make decisions. So those of you on the call, and it'd be interesting to see any comments, you know, there have been countless different people that have reached out to me through some of the content I post on LinkedIn saying, I'm getting ghosted, I'm not hearing anything back, I'm going through 4 stages, it's been 18 weeks, you know, this has been going on forever. Also, salary is another huge thing. The same roles that were kind of going out to market for TA directors at 150, 175k, you know, a year ago, are now more often than not kind of being floated around at the 110 to 120 mark. I got put forward for a role the other week where the span of salaries was anywhere between 75 and 150k. You kind of, I think this plethora of kind of choice that people seem to have is just leading to some of the wrong behaviors from some of the employers, just around, you know, well, let's meet that person and oh, they can probably do the job, and actually that might save us some money. And there's just this indecision. I caught up with a friend of mine the other day who's also a TA director, and he was on his 8th interview stage for a job. So I think there's a reticence from employers to make decisions. I think salaries have been driven down. I do think that there are some positive signs out there, but I think there's also some really, really bad practice from some companies. One company posted a job, it got 700 apply clicks on LinkedIn, and I then got the same job called to me from an agency. And I kind of said to the agency, well, why is it that I'm getting called about this when they've got 700 click-throughs? And they were kind of like, well, you know, it's really just a paper exercise. Why they're doing that? It's a tick box exercise. And that kind of stuff just horrifies me, especially when they're advertising a TA director role, because it kind of means that they really, really do need that TA director, because that kind of practice isn't appropriate. But that's the kind of stuff that I'm seeing. I don't want to go on for too long. But
yeah, and why do you think, and perhaps sort of Trish or Phil, happy to come to you on this one as well, why do you think we're seeing such bad practice at the moment? Because I think when we spoke the last week or so, sort of talking about some of the content, you know, everyone that's looking for roles being made redundant, they're in TA, they're in recruitment, that's their job, they know how to find people for roles. You'd think it would be easy, right? But actually, if there's this such bad practice, what do you think's pushing that bad practice forward?
Do you know, I think there's such an uncertainty in the atmosphere, Natasha. It's almost that psychological contract within TA at the moment. I mean, if you think about it, you know, this is our TA extended family, right? This is our industry. We've all been in it for years. And I think people are nervous about pushing that boundary. When you're internal in a business, it can be a little bit nerve-wracking, especially when you see all of your colleagues being made redundant. You see the uncertainty in our sector. You know, you get a call from your HRD saying, well, we need a new TA director. This is what we need. Maybe they're not challenging enough. I think we just need to be honest. You know, I've recently joined a business, a new company in the last couple of weeks, and I can tell you they didn't know what they needed when they started talking to me. So, you know, and we were talking with a panel earlier, it's almost up to us to educate, you know, and start talking about this in a more honest and efficient manner, saying, right, you know, there are 3 different levels or 4 different levels of what you might need. Is this really what your business needs right now? And let's talk about it openly and honestly. And I don't think we're having enough of those honest conversations.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And there was a comment around sort of salaries earlier. I think someone mentioned that there was a sort of TA director role for 35k at the moment. And David, you mentioned that salaries are sort of coming down. I think they were inflated over the last couple of years for you know, the reasons that there were. In terms of salaries, and obviously people have mortgages that they have to pay. They've been used to a certain income. The problem is that people are going to start just taking roles because they need something. They've got that kind of desperation. We were talking about this earlier on. Phil, can I come to you just around that sort of salary and that kind of just not just taking the first role that comes to you because you need to buy or you need to get that money coming in? Oh, and I'm going to ask you to unmute if that's okay. There you go. Early on, and we managed to get through the first unmute.
There we go. Yeah, I've forgotten us. There we go. It's always somebody. Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because, you know, I've been there where I've been unemployed for months on end, you know, looking just to take a job. You know, at one point I was, I went and joined Kitchens Direct to do some cold calling for them. I lasted 45 minutes before I got up and walked away, because I just needed to pay my mortgage, and how I thought I was going to do it by doing that, I do not know. But yeah, it's real, right? So. You know, this kind of speaks to the deflation in salaries, that if the roles are there and people are going for them out of desperation, then that will just continue to fuel the reduction in salary. That's how it works. But I would definitely urge you to, even when it's getting tough, just to sort of take a moment to pause and kind of reflect on your own self-worth, and not just jump into the first thing that comes along. Because what, in an ideal world, what you don't really want is then to have like 3 months at a new employer, only then to suddenly, to be keeping looking in the market and then get another offer that's paying more. It just doesn't look great.
Yeah.
But I appreciate it's hard.
Yeah, and actually Karafi pulled together some data and research which we'll be able to share post-event with everyone as well. And interestingly, sort of people within recruitment, so TA and sort of IHRs, etc., the average tenure back in November last year, so November 22, was 10 months, and it has since increased to 12 months, but the industry average, across all roles is 18 months. And I think that's because of that fueling of perhaps redundancies, but also those sort of offers of, increased salary, etc. So hopefully we'll see that the tenure might start increasing as time goes through as well. Just to touch on just a couple of sort of data points and some sort of salaries. We've asked Horsefly, so for anyone that would be interested in sourcing data for talent analytics, they're super brilliant. They have a ton of insight, and they get their data from lots of different sources in real time. So it's all very up to date and accurate information. The regional results of average salary across the UK is sitting at 50,000. There's 39,000 people and 300 sort of job count is what was shown. So on average, about 130 people per vacancy. And obviously that switches and that changes across different industry, across different locations as well. London, the south and the east obviously pays slightly more, but actually it's the east of England that has the highest salary, average salary of 62,000. The lowest is the southwest at 39,000 as well. So just a little bit of benchmarking for those of you that are looking at the moment. We can obviously share this data. I'm sure Horsefly would be more than happy to sort of give additional insights for those of you there. But I don't know if anyone's got any sort of additional commentary on those sort of salaries and people looking.
I would jump in there just for a second. A lot of it is dictated by market size, right? So if you're in East Anglia, the percentage of recruiters in East Anglia, because of the number of major employers in East Anglia, is probably significantly lower. Therefore, you would probably expect a more significant kind of salary to be paid. Conversely, actually in the southwest, it's not necessarily a supply and demand issue. It's actually more one of cost and cost implications. If you look at the companies that are based down there, that's more indicative of the salaries that are being paid. It's not your major kind of FTSE 100s or FTSE 250s even that are based down in the far tips of the southwest. It's more smaller independent businesses, and that kind of drives that. But I think there is what's also very interesting, and what we haven't mentioned is this kind of remote dynamic. Because I think what we all got used to during the kind of the pandemic years of 2020, 21, maybe 22 was almost 100% direct or 80%, sorry, not direct, 100% home working or 80% home working. And now a number of companies like Dyson, etc., are being very vocal in the press and kind of saying that they're really interested in having people in the office 3-4 days a week. So it's, I think that's something to note also, because it's not impossible still to find a job with a company based in London, get the higher salary, but only still actually have to be in the office 1 day a week.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to launch another quick poll now, just to for those of you that are currently looking and have perhaps moved around in the last sort of 12 months. It'd be great to understand just some of the success when looking for roles. So where actually have you had success looking for those roles? And if you have selected other, please do feel free to write in the comments or in the chat function actually where that other was as well. It'd be really interesting to see the results of this one. And I think this is where we're going to move on to the sort of second part, and actually, how do you stand out in a crowded marketplace that we are in? So I'll just wait for a couple more results to come through. I'll share that, and then perhaps Phil, I'm going to come to you first around some of the common pitfalls that actually people make when either applying or on their CV, etc. So let me just grab the results here.
Right.
So LinkedIn and referrals joint first up here. Then direct applications, headhunted, and other is next. Let me just have a look at some of your own networking. Yeah, interesting.
Really interesting split, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm almost surprised actually that the LinkedIn isn't higher, but it's interesting to see that the referrals level pegging with LinkedIn. I mean, I think one of the pieces of work that I did after I left Amazon was I went to do a kind of a fractional TA role for a charity, and it gave me kind of up-to-date experience of using the back end of the recruiter license on LinkedIn, which I hadn't done for a little while. And what astonished me was the volume of people making applications through LinkedIn that weren't sort of tweaking their CVs in any way. You know, I was putting an advert out there, and I'd get, I don't know, 100 applications for it. And I'd be going through the applications, and, you know, I'm talking to TA people here, right? So you know this, right? You look through the applications and you're thinking, why has this person applied for this? I can't see barely anything on the CV that is related to the advert that I put out. Or, you know, there's a twinkle here and there, but, you know, what's all this stuff? It's just noise. You will see this, right, on a day-to-day basis. This is your job. So I'm not telling you things you don't know. But when you're in the market, you have to sort of remember this and make sure that if you're applying for a job, having one version, you know, the master CV, and that is all that you're going to use, is going to be a massive fail. You know, you really need to be in at the, I advise my clients to sort of almost have the CV on one side of the screen and the job advert on the other, and use the job advert as a launch pad or a springboard or whatever you want to call it for the CV. And it's hard, right? I understand that it's hard to sort of be really objective about yourself, but you know, the first big tip I would say is absolutely try and objectively go through the job advert and go, okay, so they're saying they do this, they're saying they're looking for that, and they're saying that the ideal candidate will have this, whatever these things are. Is that stuff in my CV really plain to see? Because I think the mistake that we make, and this is everybody, right? Not just TA professionals, but, you know, everybody with their CV, if they're going for a similar job in a similar market, they'll make a whole bunch of assumptions that because they've done a job at a level, that the reader will get what they've done. They'll understand it almost without using the words, without saying it. So my advice would be just be a bit more explicit about what you've done, and make sure that it speaks to the actual advert, because otherwise you're going to get a disconnect. Now, you just have to do that enough, because the vast majority of people will just be sending their standard CV. So as if you were to even just spend 15 minutes looking at the actual job and looking at your CV and matching them up, then, you know, you're going to be ahead of most people. The other thing is about, there's a few things, I suppose, about when your CV is like packed, rammed in, you know, you don't have to look very hard these days for somebody saying, you know, how long's a CV got to be? You know, is it 2 pages? Is it, you know, is it 3 pages? Is it 1 page? Well, I would say don't get too hung up on it. But if you are into 4 pages, then you probably haven't done a great job in condensing your experience. I'd always say try and keep your experience in like a V shape or a funnel, so that the most recent stuff, you say a bit more about that, and the stuff that was 10 years ago, if you've been in work for 10 years or longer, you know, you just keep reducing that stuff down, and make sure there's plenty of white space around the words. You know, use some line spacing, use use gaps between the jobs and try to reduce the volume of words that you're using, try and say things more succinctly. So otherwise you just end up with something in your inbox as a recruiter. You've all seen them, right? That looks like a brick that's come through your window. And you think, Christ, how am I going to read that? It's just too heavy. I can't even see the words.
Yeah.
So make sure there's some white space in there.
Just a quick question that's come in, Phil, is how much from Mark, how much emphasis would you place on a cover note and also an immediate follow-up to say that you've applied and looking forward to hearing?
Cover letters. The cover letters are kind of, right. I mean, you don't have to go far on LinkedIn to see my thoughts on cover letters. If they ask for one, include one. If they don't, then I won't bother. But if you're going to do one, please do not just drop a kind of super standard thing, right? You need to take a little bit of time. People ask me, can you write me a cover letter? I'll say, yeah, but it's going to cost you this, because actually it takes a long time to do it properly. Again, looking at the job advert, what is it? A little bit of research into the organization. What are their problems? What are the problems that they're facing? And how are you the person to solve them? And that isn't regurgitating your CV, as you will see from my CV. No, none of that. It just needs to be really authentic. That this is what I can bring to the party. I've done this and this, and this is how I think I can help you solve your problems. But otherwise, I remember back in the day applying for things on Total Jobs where it said, drop in your cover letter. I just say, here's my CV for the job.
Yeah.
And being the recruiter on the other side, I can remember when I was at Capital One, seeing jobs come through, that applicants come through that had applied through Total Jobs or whatever, and they would say, there'd be the ones with the cover letter, and then there'd be the ones with the here's my CV. I'd always going to look at the CV first. You just are. You're not going to look at the cover letter first and then look at the CV. You can look at the CV, and if the CV, generally speaking, isn't up to muster, are you going to spend time reading the cover letter? Probably not.
I think a question that actually came through as part of the registration questions was around making your CV ATS proof as well. So obviously ATSs filter out a lot of CVs, and David, I think you had an example that you mentioned last week where within 30 minutes of a job that you were overqualified for, you'd been auto-rejected. And I think, is there a way that you can adapt your CV to make it friendly to ATSs, or is it totally dependent on what systems and assessment processes that they're using?
I think semantics are really important. So if you think about the algorithm on LinkedIn, when someone is doing a search on LinkedIn in Recruiter, they're not just searching on talent acquisition, right? They will also use maybe resourcing or talent or recruitment or recruiter. There are different variables on a theme that if you apply them and apply that logic in many, many different formats and make sure that you add that into, or keywords into each of your different roles and titles where possible, vary the titles that you've had. So if you've been a head of TA for the past five roles, but actually changed one or two of them to head of recruitment, head of resourcing, head of whatever, you have got statistically a better chance on the algorithm of coming up higher on a search. Also, with that as well, if you're doing a one-click apply through LinkedIn, you need to make sure that your LinkedIn profile doesn't just say, I was here at this date to this date, done. There needs to be as much content and context on your LinkedIn profile as there would be on your CV. Keep it minimal, but add those semantics and vary the words and make sure that you're kind of ticking all the right boxes, because that really does make a very big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to move on just a slightly sort of different sort of question just on this, and we'll keep on coming back to, I'm sure, CVs and sort of research and bits and pieces. Trish, when searching for a role, and that there's, as we've seen, there's a certain amount of desperation that you need to get a job, you need to pay your bills, but actually you also need to be the right person for the right job, employer brand, everything else, looking at different sort of companies. What's been your process whilst you've been looking for your new role around doing that research, reaching out to the recruiters or anyone else?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, Natasha, we had a brief conversation about this last week, I think. And for me, and maybe I'm old school and I do it differently to everybody else, but my process has always been actually, I do a lot of research into a company before I actually apply. It has to be from a value and behavior based, but subjective. It has to fit what I want. But the role has to be right. And, what David was saying earlier, changing your titles, head of resourcing, director of talent, global TA director, all of those roles have the same title, but sometimes there's a very different variance between them in different businesses and what they mean. So it's finding out if that advert, which is normally an advert, not a job description, as we all know, is actually doing what it says on the bottle, right? And to do that, generally, I reach out to recruiters, I reach out to people I know in those businesses or my network first before I send an application in, because I want to make sure, as we're all saying, it's just as much our responsibility to find out if they're the right company for us as if we're the right person for them. So that tends to be my process, in fairness. I do a lot of background before you get my nice little short cover letter, if I send that, and my CV that's tailored, and what Phil was saying earlier really resonates. So I was unfortunate that I had to let go of my whole team in January and make 9 of my TA recruiters redundant. And out of the 9 in the last 6 months, only 4 have got a job. So that says a lot, but the market is changing. But we've supported each other with, sometimes even though you've been in the industry for 23 years, having someone else look at your CV just to give you an opinion and say, right, I've done this. Actually, what does it look like to you? Even in this group saying, how do I come across? This is the area I want to look at. This is what I've done. So I think it's good to have that network.
Yeah, absolutely. And David, I know you were talking and you're quite passionate about having this network, and it's been mentioned on some of the poll and the other as well. Yeah.
I think the network bit for me has been incredibly important. So I have about 15,000 followers or something like that on LinkedIn, which is great. And it sounds like a lot of people, but it's not really relevant unless they're the right people, right? It's good to have followers and to have an audience for what you're kind of posting, but you can only build that followership or that network or your kind of reach, if you like, through consistent content, right? So for the people who have followed me and that are on the call and have ever seen any of my content, the last kind of 3 or 4 months, it's been tailored to kind of this stuff. It's been tailored to job seekers, TA specifically, how things can be done better in TA. And actually sharing a lot of that content provided the vast majority of opportunity that then came to me in my job search. So it actually came to me through people who I knew or who were following me on kind of LinkedIn. I was posting relevant content. They were saying, oh, that was a really interesting piece or whatever. Actually, have you heard about this? Did you know that blah, blah, blah are looking at this? Like literally in the last 10 minutes that I've been on this call, I've had 3 different messages on LinkedIn from people saying, don't know if you've seen this one or not. But the more vocal and the more active you are on a platform like LinkedIn, the more your old friends, colleagues, whatever will reach out to you and they'll have your back, if you did a good job, right? I mean, obviously, if you didn't do a good job, then maybe not. But
and that's a different conversation.
That's a different question entirely. I mean, but I think.
What about being proactive, David? So what about reaching out to past people that you've worked with, rather than, because I know you've had more success with referrals and your own network.
I have, yeah. So right now, the work that I'm doing is actually for a CPO that I used to work for. So I think there's an element of pride that you've got to swallow almost if you're really invested in your kind of your next move. And that can sometimes be going to an ex-boss and kind of saying, look, I know I left you at this company or whatever, if there's any opportunities to come back or if you would like to work together again, again, you have to swallow a little bit of pride for it. But in my case, that has generated a lot of opportunity, going to old employers, going to old managers. But also I think there's another thing as well. It's about using your nous a little bit and kind of bending the rules. I don't want to encourage anybody to break them, but if you see a role that's advertised on LinkedIn, you can typically see who the recruiter is that's posting that job. Rather than applying for that job, find out who else you know in your network that is at that company, reach out to that person and say, would you endorse me for a job? If they would, send a message to the recruiter saying, I know David Wood, or I know, Ishmael, or whoever it might be. and kind of send the recruiter a message and say, oh, I've been in touch with this man, he thinks it might be a good idea for me to get a job. If that person's at the right level in the business, that will almost certainly impact your probability of getting an interview, or at least having your CV reviewed a little bit more seriously. And
it's about being more proactive rather than just applying
100%.
for, especially in this competitive market. That's how you stand.
Yeah. You don't want to be one of 700. You want to be one of about 10 or 15 that stand out for the right reasons, because you're either a referral, or because you used to work for the CPO, or because this or because that. You know, the reason for it can't be, oh, you know, I'm really local, it's down the road for me, it's really handy. Why does the company care about that? They don't. It's not relevant. But if it's relevant to them that you've worked formerly for the CPO or for the CFO or whatever, name drop, right? It works. No one's really comfortable doing it. Is it a bit, ugh? Yeah, it is. But how much do you want a job, right? So I guess swallow the pride, bend the rules a little bit, and use a bit more creative license. If all you're doing is sending, to Phil's point, if all you're doing is sending the same CV without editing it, without changing it or amending it for each role you're going to, and all you're doing is pinging in an application, all you are going to see is disappointment, because you're going to be one of 300, or to use your stats, right? 130 was it per role?
Yeah, on average. Yeah.
So a lot of the click-throughs that I've seen on LinkedIn are over 400 per job. Do you want to be one of 400? Or do you want to be one of 10 or 15 who have taken a bit of creative license and used their network, right?
Yeah,
I would be the latter.
100%.
Just to add to that, you know, you're saying, David, about you're getting in touch with people that you know from organizations, your old boss, or, you know, colleagues that you've worked with in the past. Something that you could try, and I've often advised this, is you can do this in a kind of double header, and drop a note to those people and say, hey, look, don't know if you're aware, but I'm back in the market. You know, X, Y, and Z's happened. Wonder if you'd be able to drop me a few. This isn't the same as asking for a recommendation, although you are, right? Wonder if you'd be able to drop a few lines just about what it was like to work with me when we did this thing. You know, lead the witness, get them to be really specific. You know, would you be able to write a few lines about what it was like to work with me in this job or on that project? Yeah, it really helped me as I sort of put myself out there. And then you're telling them that you're out there and ready and looking, but you're also getting them to endorse you at the same time. You know, and if then they know, it's kind of implicit. I mean, you can go in further and, you know, be explicit and say, you know, have you got anything going at the same time? Would you know of anything? But, you know, if you're going to make that contact, you might as well be asking for a recommendation at the same time.
Most
Yeah,
definitely.
but just phrasing it ever so slightly differently, you know, and not just kind of dropping the, you know, ask this person for a recommendation, click, because, you know, be a bit more personal about it and just ask them to write a few words by way of.
Yeah.
But also solve a problem. Just very, very quickly, 10 seconds. Also solve a problem for someone. Everybody looks at job searches as really binary. It's either perm, or it's contract, or it's day rate, or it's temp. Don't be quite so binary. If there is a job that is out there, and let's say it's a TA manager role, right? It's a leadership role within TA. That's going to take, as a process, probably 6 to 8 weeks to get to its finality. If they find someone, they're possibly going to be on a notice period, they might not be. In the meantime, why can't you ping the CPO or the head of recruitment a message and say, look, I see you've been recruiting for this role. I'm immediately available. If in the meantime you need some help, I would really love to come and join you, and I think I could add some great value for you. Bend the rules again a little bit, put yourself out there. What's the worst that's going to happen? It's going to be a no, right? But I guarantee you will miss 100% of the shots you do not take.
I think you've just read Lewis's comment on the chat function.
Yeah.
He's done exactly.
Really?
Yeah, excellent. What I'm going to do, because we are starting to run out of time, and I know there's still a lot to get through. For anyone that's got any questions that they want to pose to the panelists, can you pop them in the Q&A function? There's so much conversation in the chat, which is brilliant, but I'm finding it hard to view the questions. I want to move on to, so you've got your CV, you've amended your CV, you've updated it dependent on the job ad or the job description, and your LinkedIn's up to date, you've still got current if you've been made redundant, you've got all of those, you're reaching out to the right people, it's all good. You're now down to an interview. What's your top tips here, Phil, to stand out at an interview process?
Well,
We haven't got very long, so
no, well,
it.
prepare, right? And have some self-awareness, right? Be aware of the questions that you hate coming up. Just ask yourself the questions, sit there with a coffee, write them down and prepare some answers and practice them. It might sound a bit stupid, if you're sort of sitting in front of your laptop or a mirror or something, but just run through in your mind, write down some points that you want to use in that interview to answer those questions that you hate coming up. Then that will just kind of help chip away at some of the nerves and help improve your confidence. But the biggest thing for me, most of us, I'm sure, in the TA world, we're familiar with STAR, situation, task, actions, results. Not everybody's going to be using behavioral interview techniques, but if you actually take the time to prepare some examples and think about the situations that you've been in and prepare them in that kind of STAR framework, then you can drop them in as kind of abridged anecdotes, even if the question isn't asking you for a specific example. So they might say, how would you do this? Well, you tell them how you would do it briefly, and then you back it up with actually, a couple of years ago at this place, I did just that, and I did this, and this, and the result was this. So you're backing it up with a real example rather than it kind of being all based on sort of what you might do.
Brilliant.
Yeah, can I just say, Natasha, I totally agree with Phil. I know from experience that and a lot of the calls I've had over the last 6 months, you really have to lead those recruitment questions, because some of the recruitment people I've spoken to, and I'm really sorry, I'm quite open about it, is that, have asked very generic questions that actually don't give them the answers I would expect if I was that line manager, I would want to hear. So you really have to drive. And I think something we don't do as TA is really sell ourselves very well, right? And we need to make sure we're preparing for that before those interviews, that, as Phil said, you're tailoring your interview so they, the skills they need, the experience you need to focus on, and tailor those 10 questions that you need to make sure that you get across to them.
Yeah. David, anything to add on the interview front?
Yeah, just one thing for me, and I think it's a really, really important one. When I'm ever interviewing anyone, I want to see that they can kind of hold their own. An interview is a two-way process. Lots of people forget that an interview is a two-way process. I want someone who's asking me questions. I want someone who's kind of saying, well, what are the big challenges that you're trying to solve for right now? What's the business strategy that's leading to this kind of upturn in recruitment? What are the plans longer term for TA? What are the bigger challenges that you have? I've noticed this about your brand and blah, 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 blah. Do a bit of research, to Phil's point, right? But also to Trish's point, have an impact and kind of, I guess, give as much as you get. I expect an interview to end up being a two-way, almost entirely two-way process where each party is answering and asking questions. If not, and you just kind of sit there in a kind of an almost subservient manner going, yes, sir, no, sir, it really doesn't build your credibility. But to Phil's point, do your research. So ask a question about, oh, well, I saw this in the news. How's that impacted this? I saw that you were hiring this as well, and I've seen that, you use this ATS. Show them that you've done your research, show them that you're invested, but also ask questions. Yeah. It is not a one-way process.
Asking the right questions. It's like, if you're going for a consulting gig, if you think about the person as a client, as opposed to a boss, then ask them about their problems. What are the big problems that they're facing? What are the big challenges? What's coming up for them? Because it's a shame really that we don't get, as interviewees, the opportunity to ask this stuff at the beginning of the interview, because if we did, it would really help us tee up, playing back our responses to help them solve those problems. But there's rarely that kind of transparency. So you can still demonstrate your capability by asking cool questions.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got about 10 minutes left, and we've had a few questions that are sort of leading on to the next section around sort of staying positive and continually learning and developing as well. So I'm going to try and intermingle the Q&A with some of the questions that we already had that we were going to answer. And actually, I'm going to perhaps bring it to you first, Trish, on this one. What can the audience do to ensure that they're remaining positive, alert and up to date with current trends whilst they're between roles? It's not easy. We're making it sound very easy to get a new role in the TA market. But have you got any tips that you can share from sort of previous experience on this side?
So I have seen, and with the team that I've been supporting over the last 6 months, I mentioned a lot of the LinkedIn recruiter license training to do to keep yourself up to date with what's happening from a search perspective. I would also say make sure that you're out, widening your network. I think there was a question on the webinar chat here, Natasha, where someone said, well, if it's not TA, how do I broaden my experience? So make sure that you know what's happening, some of the legality changes, that if you want to broaden your experience and maybe look at L&D or another area, that this is a key time for you to look at those areas and see if you have the right critical skills. I think we've been talking about NLP, and we've been talking about all behaviors for a while, but actually a lot of businesses don't use that yet properly. So look at retraining in some of those areas. Look at if that would benefit you, if that's an area of interest. I think the key thing is these days we wear so many different hats in TA that if you have a route that you want to expand in, it's optimize this time, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alan has very kindly pointed out keeping in touch with the IHR network. And, without blowing our own trumpet, we have a ton of free resources. We run free webinars, we run free breakfast events. Some of our conferences are paid for, but we really want to be able to give people the knowledge and the insight that they are perhaps missing when they're not in those roles. And the webinars are online, so they're great for people outside of London. But for some of our breakfast events in London, you're also networking with people that are in industry and working as well. So you get those touch points. So that's also a great one. There was also the question that came through was around courses or training. And I think there's been a few comments on there, but Karathi do run Talent Ed, which is a brilliant up-to-date senior training for TA members. It is more for managers and above. It is a time investment, but it is brilliant, and it sort of curates 20 plus years of knowledge and expertise into this brilliant piece as well. So they're the couple that we would recommend. Phil, from your side, you started your current business as a side hustle. What would be your sort of tips or recommendations for people that perhaps are currently unemployed or just feel as though they need to future-proof themselves as well?
Well, yeah, it was sort of a side hustle, and I just had a kind of a moment of reckoning where I thought, what is it I can do? And it turned out that CV writing, career coaching was, ticked a bunch of boxes for me, but I did it because I was really introspective and thought, well, what do I enjoy doing? It was a moment where I just thought, I can't just go back to doing what I was doing before. So I suppose I would have, if you're going to think about starting a side hustle, I would, rather than sort of thinking about what it is, I could do that. Take it as an opportunity to really think about what you enjoy. And for me, I recognized that I enjoyed short-term pieces of work. I enjoyed getting feedback really quickly. I liked working one-to-one and not as part of, a million people in an organization. And I enjoy, and I wanted something that was going to enable me to be creative and give me some time. So that's kind of how I landed on the CV writing, because I wanted to do all of those things, as opposed to me thinking, okay, I want to go and be a CV writer now, because it just kind of, and the fifth thing was I could use all of my 20 something years experience to actually help people one-to-one. So it was coming from a place of service rather than as a place of, how can I make money?
Yeah.
It's a tough one, right, when you're looking for a job. But if you think of it from that perspective, when you go out into the market, when you start sort of promoting yourself on LinkedIn and putting out content, so I did a lot of that, putting out, really valuable service-led content, then people will get your authenticity and what you're there for, as opposed to thinking that you're there to just sort of turn a few quid.
Yeah.
Natasha, can I just say one thing that's really key, and I'm sure you all agree with this, is from a well-being perspective, it's quite a stressful time when you're doing this, 8 hours a day. and you're putting a lot of effort in, and you're maybe not getting a lot of response, or you're getting that one or two, make sure you make time to do the fun stuff as well. You know, go for a nice walk with the dog if you have a dog, or take the cat for a walk. You know, make sure that you're actually having some breathing space as well. And I tend to kind of, I set myself little goals for the day and what I want to achieve and the timings I have. So just make sure that you're still doing those things, because it can be overwhelming to feel quite pressured, because we all know at the end of the day, we've all got mortgages to pay and children to feed.
Yeah, don't get bogged down in it all, because otherwise it's, if you're looking at something for too long, you end up not being able to see it at all, don't you?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And David, from your side, for anyone that's looking for more help or assistance, and I think it's been great that actually everyone's put their LinkedIn profiles and said, I'm more than happy to look over a CV. There's been a real sense of community in this chat here. So I'm sure we'll be able to send out who's attended and actually LinkedIn profiles for everyone post-event. But for anyone that's looking for more help, whether that's looking at CVs or just a chat, where would you go for that? Or have you got any recommendations?
So for me personally, what I've kind of done is, again, I've used my network. I tend to always go +1. And what I mean by that is in the hierarchy. So rather than asking for kind of peer-to-peer feedback on a CV, I would tend to kind of go up in that imaginary hierarchy type level, not because of the hierarchy, but because I think often you'll get a more objective and critical view than you might from a friend or a colleague. Or an ex-colleague. I went to a lot of different CPOs that I'd worked for and kind of said, you know, what do you think about my CV? What do you think about this? What do you think about that? Have you got 20 minutes for a chat? And I would just have kind of 20-minute conversations with people. And I've done it for so many people. In the last 4 weeks, I've probably had 15, 20 conversations just with people who've seen some of my content on LinkedIn and reached out and said, oh, would you be open to a chat? And even if it's just kind of putting their mind at rest a little bit, and reassuring them that it's going to be okay, it's just a moment in time, then that's a great thing. It's not always about something as tactical as my CV or, you know, I need some feedback on this. Sometimes it's just, I'm having a shit time. I'd really love to just have a bit of, you know, consolation and just feel like someone's kind of heard me a little bit, and someone who I respect and care about their opinion. What I would say also is job searching is a really tough thing, to Trish's point. I personally have never spent 8 hours a day doing it. I would set aside 1, 2, maybe 3 hours a day where I would take some strategic tactical actions and say, right, I'm going to reach out to 20 different CPOs today, or I'm going to look at all the jobs online. I'm going to find out who the recruiters are and I'm going to ping them a message. Yeah. Or I'm going to remind myself, you know, remind the agencies that are in my sphere that I'm available. Or I'm going to reach out to the companies and say, right, well, I know there are 5 jobs there. I could do any one of those jobs. I'm going to reach out and offer my services temporarily. Yeah. Just to Trish's point, give yourself a break. But also, if the pressure is there from a money point of view, that pressure is going to start showing when you're interviewing. Yeah. So swallow the pride. You know, before I took Mind Gym, when I got made redundant from Stonegate back in 2021 or whatever it was, I was literally 2 days away from starting a driving job with Tesco to keep me busy. My wife was like, get the hell out the house. You are doing my head in. Yeah. And I was like, okay, do you know what? I'll earn some money. It's not going to be the same, but it's going to help. Yeah. And it took some of the pressure off. I think if there's too much pressure, you go into an interview, what's going to happen is that pressure is going to come across. It's going to potentially start to look desperate. And that's really important that you don't do that. So I encourage anybody to take on some part-time work, do some agency work, do whatever, just so you still feel valued, you still feel like you're bringing some money in, takes the pressure off a bit, and then you can properly dedicate yourself at times.
I really like that strategic, tactical actions, and it's not spending 8 hours in front of the screen. I'm going to launch a final poll to give some get some feedback for us as well, because I think this has been a brilliant session. We are running out of time, as I knew we would, and I think we could probably talk about this for another couple of hours. If you would like to have a sort of part 2 of this and we cover some more specifics, please do feel free to write in the chat function what else you would want covered, or if you want to go into more detail around specific areas, that would be super helpful. But as you're completing that poll, Lavanya has written, I think we've touched on it slightly about sort of retraining and other bits and pieces. Would you say this is a good time to retrain into something outside of TA, and what would the panel recommend? And I think it depends on what you're interested in, I suppose. But Phil, have you got any sort of suggestions or something that's perhaps TA focused, but actually just slightly outside?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because I mean, TA and HR are quite often the kind of bedfellows, right? But you know, having been a recruiter in sort of headhunting firms and in-house, we always sort of saw ourselves different to the HR people. But I know that quite a lot of people that are in TA now have not come through that route and have come through HR. So maybe, you know, there's an option to kind of look back at your career and go, well, actually, I really enjoyed this bit of HR, or, you know, what happens if I applied for an HR role, or you know, took a course, did some CIPD stuff, and went that way. Equally, project management, you know, a lot of recruitment is about project management and keeping timelines in check, communication, all of that stuff is hugely important in project management. Been there, done it. It's a good way to sort of move your career forward in a different way.
That's brilliant.
That's what I did.